and welcome to the 9th module of the unit devoted to Yves Chevallard and the anthropological theory of the didactic, the ATD, in the project of ICMI awardees multimedia online resources. This module is devoted to the way the ATD approaches cognition. It is sometimes said that the ATD is a productive framework to approach knowledge and its transformations in institutional settings, but that does not approach cognition and thus needs to be completed with a cognitive approach. If, why, and how different approaches can be combined or articulated is a difficult issue we are not addressing here. What this module proposes is to present how cognition is modeled in the ATD, what are the main elements of this model, and how they can be used in didactic analysis. The ATD ICMI AMOR series of modules has not adopted an axiomatic perspective. Otherwise, this would have been the first module of the series, because it includes the basic notions of the theory, its primitive terms. Allow me a word of warning. I think this module is more abstract and difficult to follow than the previous ones. Or so it seems to me. I hope you will be patient to follow me till the end. The article ATD in the Encyclopedia of Mathematics Educations, published by Springer in 2020, adopts this more axiomatic perspective we are considering here. And you can find more presentations in some recent texts that are linked in the website references. However, the origins of this model date back to the 19th, and there exists an English version on the very first presentation of the model. Cognition is a term currently used in educational studies, certainly under the influence of psychology. It comes from the Latin word cognoscere, meaning knowing with. We can find different definitions depending also on the discipline or area of knowledge. The development of cognition studies by different disciplines have given rise to the cognitive science as the study of the mind and its processes. We find this in many dictionaries definitions or in the Wikipedia. However, we will adopt the one more general of the Spanish Academy Dictionary that remains closer to the word's etymology and does not restrict the act of knowing to the mind or the mental action. If you have the experience of driving a car, playing music, or multiplying matrices, you will agree with me that knowing is not only in the mind, but also through our members and body. So we can leave it as an open question if cognition has to be located in a specific part of our body. Let us see how Yves Chevallard presents what he calls an ATD theory of cognition, something he considers as the basis of the ATD. He says that it is too often overlooked that the ATD comprises a theory of cognition, which is foundational to the rest of the ATD. This theory of cognition sets forth two kinds of characters: persons, that we will name X, and institutions, with a big I, or more precisely, institutional positions P in I. And he gives two examples: a class with the position of teacher and students, a family with three positions. Like all institutions, they are evolving entities with also evolving positions. As an example, let us consider Amara. She's a student in grade 7 of school Sigma. She's very good at sports and does not especially excel in math. She is the class delegate at the lower secondary school board. She also plays football at the local club as a goalkeeper. And in her group of friends, she is always the latecomer. So we see many institutions in Amar's life, with her possibility to occupy different positions: the school, her class, the sports clubs, being a delegate, the football team, being a goalkeeper in the football team, her group of friends, and many others that are not mentioned here. Here are our first primitive terms: the persons, the institutions, and the positions within these institutions. We are all persons in the sense of the ATD, as individuals. Persons are very complex entities, we all are, and inaccessible as a whole, almost by definition. What we know about persons are some and few of their faces. The second term is institution. We can see an institution as a set of organized and settled activities and all what emerges from them. They are also complex systems. The relationships between persons and institutions can be grasped through the notion of position. Persons act in institutions where they can occupy different positions. When we play role games, or when we talk about changing hats or wearing too many hats, we refer to this plurality of positions we can occupy, sometimes in the same institution. For example, in my university, I am at the same time a researcher, a teacher, a colleague, a supervisor, a friend. By occupying a position, a person X becomes the subject of the institution. And we will talk about subjects and institutions. However, the subjection to institutions has to be taken in a productive sense. In the same way as the back wheel of a bike is subjected to the bike through a chain, it is this subjection what makes movement possible. In our lives, creating institutions or entering institutions help us do things, also to transform the institutions we are entering. Therefore, institutions shape the person we are, but they are also shaped by ourselves, being their subjects. These institutions, they all leave a tiny or a big trace in our person in the same way we impact in their way of being. And here we see the bicycle and the chain. The next term is a very general one, is the notion of object. Object is like a passepartout. Anything is an object. A person, an institution, a position, a relationship, a bicycle, a movement, a word, a mathematical notion, a joke, a feeling, etc. Persons, institutions, positions, and objects are linked through the notion of relation. The relation to an object is a key notion in the way ATD approaches cognition. So we can talk about the relation of a person X to an object O. We can also talk about the relation of an institution to an object O in a given position P. This is the Ri of P and O. That we can write also Ri of O when we consider the set of all positions. And that represents what is O in I. Pay attention that we say relation to an object. So the relation of a person X to an object O corresponds to all the things X knows about O, or what the person can say about O. In all the ways this object O exists for X. And then, in this case, we will say that the relation of this person X to O is non-empty. And in the same way, an object exists in an institution, or we can also say that the institution I knows the object O if, in at least one position, the relation in this position to the object is non-empty. In fact, about these relations between persons and institutions, we can say that a person X knows O through an institution I where he or she occupies a position P. And we will assume as a principle that the personal relation of a person X to an object O is formed through all the institutional relations to this object O in positions P that X has occupied at a given moment. And that is very quickly said the way we understand knowing an object O by a person X or by an institution. The sets of all objects that are known by a person X or an institution I forms the cognitive universe. We often talk or refer to cognitive universes, not with this term, but for instance, when we say that in math, we ask what grade 7 student needs to know, or when to say today my students, I present them an easy problem, but they didn't really understood the universe, the context, sorry. Or when we say today's children, they don't know what is a typewriter. So that means that this object is not in their cognitive universe. Or when we say that, I didn't know that in didactics or in math education we could use symbols to represent notions. So this was not part of our cognitive universe. Let's see how to use this notion and this symbolism especially. So let's take this case that we have an object that is proportionality and a class of 7th graders in a school or in a country, depends on the general case we're talking. And then we can consider the position of a student or of a teacher, or we can consider a concrete student or a concrete teacher. So we can think of Amara and her teacher, her school, etc. So what we can talk about? We can talk about the relation of a given object, like proportionality, of a generic student of the class. What does a generic student knows about this object? And also we can talk about what the teacher knows, or how the teacher relates to this object in general, but we can also consider the concrete case of Amara with all her subjections to different institutions that will shape also her relationship to proportionality. And then we can consider the specific concrete relationship of Amara's teacher to this object proportionality. This is the first level of relation. But then we can consider also the relation of the teacher to the way Amara relates to proportionality in concrete. Or in general, the relation of a teacher, general teacher, to the way a 7th grader relates to proportionality in this school, in this country, or even in very general case. We can do a step further and consider the relationship of the student to the relationship of the teacher to her relationship to proportionality. So you see, we can complexify the expression to refer to different relations, to different levels of knowledge or of relation to different types of objects. So in the previous situation, I talked about a special case that we can consider a special case that Amara has to improve her calculation skills with fractions. So when we say this, we are modeling this expression with the relationship of Amara to fractions that needs to evolve towards a better relation. How can this relation evolve? What does improvement mean? And what would be a good relation to fractions or to proportionality? And how to know if the relation of a person to a given object is in conformity to a given institutional relation. So when we say these kind of things, she has to improve her skills, he doesn't know well, we are referring to first a personal relation to an object and then an institutional relation of an object, and we are comparing both. The question is how the institutional relation is determined and how the conformity criteria are established, and how also this depends on the institution that is considered. So we can ask at this point how the institutional relation shapes the personal relations development or evolution, and also what other institutions, persons, objects, and relations are also influencing this personal relation. We have seen that Amara has a lot of subjections to other institutions and positions, and she encounters many objects that are shaping, influencing her personal relation to an object. That is why we talk about this complexity. The teachers face the problem of how to help students develop their personal relations to objects, or more generally the cognitive universe, in conformity with a given and always partially undefined institutional relationship or institutional cognitive universe. In the case of researchers, there is a kind of double direction. So researchers give priority to the institutional relationship, because this is a way to avoid all this personal complexity we have seen with the Amara's case. And also because we assume that this institutional relation shapes the personal relations of all the subjects of the institution. But at the same time, in the other sense, to access the visible aspects of the institutional, so the visible aspects of the personal relations are used as empirical evidence to approach the institutional relations, together with many other empirical pieces of evidence. So we approach the institutional relation, but we use the personal relations to approach it. Okay, so let's now have a look at two main questions. The first one is, how is this institutional relationship determined or built? We have seen this in Module 2 about didactic transposition, when we examined many different institutional relations to proportionality, considering different institutions, the scholarly ones, at different historical periods, the noospheres, etc. So the Module 2, in a way, approaches this question of how to determine the institutional relationship to an object like proportionality, here in the position of a student, but it could be the position of a teacher or whatever. The second question is what an institutional relation to an object is made of. And in fact, we have seen a partial answer of this in Module 3 about the praxeological analysis. The praxeological analysis, the notion of praxeology, helps us describe what is an object in a given institution. So what we do, in this case we consider omelettes and proportionality, and we saw that doing an omelette, the relation to an omelette can be very different depending if you are in Spain, in France, or in Japan, and in any other country. But also the relation to proportionality. What is a proportionality in terms of praxeologies? What we do, how we think about, what we say, how we justify proportionality can also be very different if we consider different institutions. Finally, I want to finish this module by mentioning the more recent developments of the theory of conditions that introduces a relative perspective. We have seen previously that the cognitive universe of a person or an institution is the set of objects to which X or I have a non-empty relation. And we talk also about the potential conformity or non-conformity of a given personal relation to with an institutional one. like the nonconformity of Amara's relation to fractions. By doing so, we assume the existence of a more or less hidden or implicit evaluating instance that we are calling V, that can be a person or an institution who decides, claims, or considers that a given relation is or not empty, or is or not in conformity, according to some criteria that can or not be made explicit. So this is a methodological difficulty that should be considered by researchers. And why? To avoid implicitly assuming such an evaluation instance, to be ourselves such an evaluation instance. So to avoid this, we need to elaborate reference models of the objects and relations under study. Otherwise, we run the risk of taking the institutional relation for granted as if it was an absolute and unquestionable reference. I can refer you to Module 4, where we partially approach this issue. And now I led you with some final frequently asked questions that I hope will contribute to the evolution of your personal relationship to the ATD, and hopefully also to your personal relation to research in didactics of mathematics. Thank you very much.